are standing next to me, and I say, we want to get married. Well, Carolyn, would you allow that? And they said, but she's not Jewish and you are. And I said, no, no, she's Jewish also. She converted. She went through a full mikveh conversion. I mean, an Orthodox conversion. She went through it to become a Jew so she could marry me, because the first night that I slept with her, I told her, we're not going to get married because you're not Jewish. But then she said, don't worry about that. And of course, when it came time, she did the mikveh, the whole thing. And her mother shot back with, your children are going to be Jewish. And Carolyn said, of course. What else would they be? So there was nothing. I mean, it was just a formality to ask, and we did get married. My parents paid for the wedding, and it was at the Louis Sherry, which is, at that time, was across the street from the Waldorf Astoria. And, you know, it was a whole big deal, really a big deal. It was a party for my parents, not for me. And we stayed married for a while, and about a year or so later, we had a kid, David, and my parents were ecstatic. And Carolyn looked a lot like my mother, and so my mother had Carolyn's hair. My mother had her hairdresser do Carolyn's hair, you know, and they went out. My mother went out and bought gowns so that they would not be exact matches, but they were like mother and daughter matches. And of course, she's not the daughter of my mother. But anyhow, it was a whole big deal. That's the way they treated it. And then we got married, and then we had 2 kids. And after we had the 2 kids, we went on the road. Now, I had been on the road before, but this time I bought a van, and I made a conversion out of it, so it's a pop top. That's the van. I drew that. Yes, take the picture. I drew that. And those 2 green globs over there, those are the doors, which are duplicated by back there, the actual doors of a, I pulled it off again. Someplace like that.
It's going to be upside down.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, you do it. You do it. Come on. I can't do things. I know that.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Hi there. So, in back of us are the doors, and there are also some pictures hanging up there of our trip when we went on this trip. Which we took, even though I had been offered a job. I had left the last place that I had worked. Actually, they fired me, and then I sued them, and then they gave me money that I was owed. And the lawyer was upset because I didn't ask for more, so his piece could be bigger. Forget it. Come on. I just wanted the satisfaction. That's all. So, we went down to Florida for several months, and we cruised around the Keys and Florida generally, and then we came back up again. I did this in a car that I drove down because they were going to pay the gas because I was delivering the car, and then I picked up a car in Miami and drove it back, because the same thing was going on, and it was people who wanted their cars, but they weren't going to do the drive. So we got to do the drive, which was funny, but and things happened. But anyhow, we did get back up, and then I guess it was time for me to go back to work again. But I don't know. So I got back, and I honestly can't remember what happened after that, except I had given up my rent-controlled apartment on 98th and Broadway, 7-room apartment, and I was paying rent-control rents, which were like, I don't know, $150. So I had given that up, so I had to come back, and and then we had to get the kids into school. when the trip ended, I drove past Woodstock and I said, look, I've been a hippie for long enough. I don't need to do that scene. That's ridiculous. They're just weekenders. And I lived the life. Okay, so I went to the right and I went into the Berkshires, and I rented a house from a piano player who played at Tanglewood during the summer. And during the winter, he wanted to rent his house out so it wouldn't deteriorate or people break in or bears break in, whatever. So we rented that, and then I got the job working for my father in Baltimore at the clothing firm there, and I was just sent there to do, I was a manager of the cutting floor, which they cut the material up and then they sew it eventually and so forth. So, so I did that while the company was going bankrupt. And it was my job to get as much stuff through the system and out the door as finished product as I could. And the union objected to this because they wanted to let people go in terms of seniority. So it meant that certain people would be let go, like pressers would be let go before some sewing machine person. But if you don't need the sewing machine anymore, what you need is a presser, then you have to get rid of the sewing machine. So I had to negotiate with the union and the union reps to make them understand that if I did it by seniority, that the plant would close immediately and everybody would be out of work. So they had to do it the way I was suggesting, and I was going to be as follow what was just and right as close as I could so that we would get the stuff out and the people would work as long as they could and so forth. And that's what happened. I worked there until the whole shop shut down and went bankrupt. They went bankrupt because Johnny Carson wore a Nehru. And one of the partners in the business saw Johnny Carson in the Nehru, and he said, oh, this is going to be the big fad. So he told us to cut up every single bolt of material that we had for suits to cut them into Nehrus. And if you can imagine checks and stripes, oh my God, they were hideous. But I was ordered to do it, so that's what I did. And of course, that just made the bankruptcy happen quicker because all that stuff had to be sold for rags. Nobody would buy it. So the company went bankrupt. I was out of a job. One of my roommates from Penn hired me, got me to get hired by the company he was with, Sweetheart Cups, Maryland Cup Company. And I was hired as a programmer, systems analyst. And so I did that for a while. And it was enough to buy a house in Baltimore with a great big yard and all sorts of stuff in it, and huge place. And then after a while, I was asked to become the head of all of the programming for the manufacturing side, because manufacturing programming and accounting program are totally different.